Hi there guys, Vino here and welcome to this Vino Plonk production. Now I know I did this video a while ago now, a couple of weeks back, using my Chromebook as a way of recording the video, and I did briefly go over the fact that I have bought a Vita. In this video I'm going to be going over why I bought a Vita, especially in 2020, and we'll get into the caveats behind that and why buying a Vita in 2020 might sound insane to some, but to me it was something I wanted to do. One of the reasons why I'm doing this video, despite having done it recently, is I've been really racking my brain about what kind of video I can do as of recent, because nothing's really speaking to me. I've got a bunch of video ideas in my head, but none are really shouting out for me to do. This one, as soon as I thought of it about half an hour ago, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do a more in-depth video as to why I bought a PS Vita. So, to briefly explain the PS Vita to people who are uninitiated. The PS Vita was the follow-up to the PSP. Sony released this in 2012. It was either 2012 or 2011. It wasn't that long before the PS4, and there's a reason why I know that, and everyone knows that, is because the PS4 basically came, and I think, if I'm being honest, the PS4 is one of the reasons why the PS Vita failed. Oh, spoiler alert there, we'll get to that in a bit. So the PS Vita was a advancement on the PSP in every single way. Graphics, the screen, the fact it has two thumbsticks, everything about the PS Vita was an upgrade on the PSP. However, there were some shortcomings when it came to the PS Vita that Sony themselves were responsible for, that kind of sealed the fate, put the nail in the coffin for the PS Vita. I'm going to go over some of those things now. One of those things that did contribute towards the death of the Vita was the memory cards. Now, I don't have a memory card for my Vita, as in a Vita memory card. It would go in that slot just there. And the reason why I don't have one is I went for a PS Vita Slim, which these come with a gig pre-installed storage on there. From the factory, there's a RAM chip or a ROM chip on there. It'll be a RAM chip, sorry, on there somewhere. That, of course, is a gig in size. The original Vita, the OLED Vita, or the Fat Vita, as some people might call it, doesn't have any internal storage. The issue with that is you are required to have a memory stick to even have an account on the Vita. The account, your PSN account on a Vita, is memory card bound. That was kind of deliberate from Sony, again, to stop not only piracy, but to stop game sharing. So you couldn't, say, for instance, share a game to a friend because you'd have to give them your memory card as well. It's funny when you look back on this with, 2020 eyes, and of course the PS5 is literally going to be released in 2 or 3 weeks as I record this video, and the fact there is game sharing on the PS4, and Sony kind of welcomed game sharing, and of course that whole debacle with the Xbox One prior to launch, where Microsoft were going to lock down that system completely, and Sony kind of took the piss out of them by saying this is how you share a game, just by handing a game over to a friend. And yet, not that long prior, they did similar things to Microsoft with the PS Vita, with locking down the account. And you could, of course, hand over a card or a card, one of the Vita cards, game cards, to a friend. Of course, you could do that. But you couldn't share save games because your account was memory card bound. You couldn't share digital games, again, because your account was memory card bound. You'd have to format your Vita and then have your friends sign into your account on their Vita, and then they'll be able to play your games. But then that kind of defeats the purpose of game sharing. At that point, you're just giving your account to a friend to play with for a bit. And when you finally get your account back, who knows what state it's going to be in. I personally, and this may be, something that I personally am fearful of, I don't like handing my account over to other people, primarily because of cloud saves. And of course, the Vita does have cloud saves. And it kind of, in some ways, the Vita tipped the hat for what Sony were going to do with the PS4, and we'll get to that momentarily. But I don't like sharing my account out to other people because of cloud saves. The problem with cloud saves is I believe you only get 1 or 2 slots in the cloud, and if the person accidentally overwrites your cloud save, then you're kind of buggered. I know a friend who wants to play Bloodborne, my digital version of Bloodborne, which at one point I was almost persuaded to, of course, do that for them, but then stopped at the last hurdle when I realised that there's the potential they could overwrite my cloud save, and then I'd lose all my progress on Bloodborne, because at the time I was frequently reinstalling and uninstalling Bloodborne, and of course I need the cloud save to be intact. If one day I found out that it'd been overwritten by their progress, then I'd be distraught from that. Anyway, getting back to the Vita, I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but getting back to the Vita, I just find it so funny that a lot of things were account bound. But yes, the memory cards that the Vita had were proprietary. They were exclusive to the Vita and cost an arm and a leg. The irony of all this is they cost even more now than they did when they came out. The inflation, the commodity that these cards now are, is kind of ridiculous. And we're going to get into those cards in a little bit later, with some other methods you can use to circumnavigate those cards, which is one of the reasons why I decided to buy a PS Vita in 2020, because of the hacking community. And we'll get into that in a minute. So, a lot of Vita elitists or purists or whatever you call them, a lot of the people who say the Vita is a fantastic system, which it is, and I'm not saying that just because I've got one in my hand. The Vita was a evolution on the PSP in every single way. It's one of the best successors to a console I've ever seen. It's an improvement in every single way. The graphics the thing can put out. The fact it has dual thumbsticks, which has been a mainstay for games ever since. I'm trying to think that the first console that probably pioneered dual sticks, probably the PS1 / PS2 with the DualShock controller. Because the PSP only had one slide stick, didn't have a proper thumbstick. The Vita's fantastic in a lot of ways. However, Sony themselves kind of hammered the thing into the ground. And when the PS4 came out, some of the features that were on the PS3 for the Vita, like remote play and stuff like that, and able to share games, like download games onto your PS3 and then put them onto the PS Vita via USB stick, were seldom. They were strangely absent on the PS4. Remote play came later, but you couldn't download any PS Vita or PSP games on your PS4 and transfer them to the Vita. So the Vita comes out a year before the release of the PS4, and Sony don't completely support the Vita with the PS4, which means there are a number of people that bought a Vita that had to keep hold of their PS3 in order to fully utilise the features of the ecosystem, basically, that Sony were propagating. It's funny, people have a go at Apple these days for the ecosystem they create for their users, but to be honest, it's fantastic. The fact if you got a Mac and an iPhone and an Apple Watch and a whatever is an Apple Home, whatever their Amazon and Google Home equivalent is, the Echo equivalent, that ecosystem just simply works, and they support it. They've even put supporting for older operating systems in there if you want to take a little look. The amount of support that Apple put into their ecosystem is phenomenal. Yes, their stuff is astronomically expensive for a lot of people, so being in the ecosystem is a heavy price to pay, but once you're in that ecosystem, it works. Unlike some companies that half-arse an ecosystem when they've literally just released a shiny new handheld and kind of half-arse it. So, the PS Vita was a complete failure in the Western world. At the time, it managed to amount to about 11 million units sold, which is pitiful, by the way. It's not good at all. And I think the Wii U, which is also considered a failure, sold about 11 to 12 million. I'm trying to think how many the Virtual Boy sold, which is also, of course, a failure. It was dubbed a failure. However, in the eastern part of the world, i.e. Japan, the thing soared. In fact, when the PS Vita Slim, the model I've got, came out in 2014, I do believe it was, 2 years after the initial PS Vita was released, when they released it in Japan, they released it with a bunch of colours and a bunch of exclusive features and peripherals and accessories and stuff like that. They really went ham in the home market of Japan, but then the PS Vita, still to this day actually, does really well in Japan. So you can kind of understand why they're doing that. So I've kind of explained now a brief history of the Vita and maybe why it failed. Not support from its manufacturer. The fact that the memory cards were stupidly expensive, even more expensive nowadays. What else? The fact that it wasn't marketed very well, I'd say, in that, again, a lot like the Wii U, I think, versus the Wii, people didn't know the Vita was an upgrade over the PSP. And also their adherence to... So when the original Vita came out, there was a Wi-Fi and a 3G model. The 3G model here in the UK signed up with Vodafone, which I didn't think actually was that bad of a partnership, to be honest. Vodafone here in the UK at the time had a really good reputation, so signing up with Vodafone, I don't see a problem. In America, though, they signed up to AT&T. The problem with signing up to AT&T was AT&T didn't have a good reputation at the time, and by associating themselves with AT&T, Sony kind of tarnished themselves in the process. And the other thing that was quite the nail in the coffin is that I can't remember which region this was, but Sony advertised that you could game on the go. You could play online on the go with the Vita. What they were trying to pioneer, which is something even nowadays with handheld systems is a thing, is basically playing online over a mobile signal. So you could game online on, say, for instance, Call of Duty, to use that as an example, because that's something that everybody will understand pretty quickly. Imagine playing Call of Duty on your handheld console while you're out and about, sat on a bench in a park somewhere. You can do that. Yes, I know nowadays you can just simply make your mobile phone a mobile hotspot and do it that way. But you have to bear in mind that back in 2012, that sort of era, phones weren't as feature-rich as they were nowadays, and enabling mobile hotspot actually caused you to be charged a surcharge. So you can see where Sony's mentality was with that. However, in one of the territories, they disabled that feature. They literally didn't allow you to game over a mobile signal. You could download games, you could use the near functionality, which is basically their version of Street Pass that's, of course, on the DS. There was a bunch of things that you could do with it, but the one thing they advertised that you couldn't do was play on the go. I believe that also resulted in a domino effect that caused them to disable it in other regions as well. I remember trying to play Wipeout 2048 on the go, which, if you bought the 3G model here in the UK and signed up to Vodafone within the first X amount of time, I'm going to say 2 weeks, probably longer than that, but I'm just going to say 2 weeks for argument's sake to move on, you got Wipeout 2048 for free. You got it for paying the extra. Of course, you had to pay for the 3G model and for signing up to the pay-as-you-go plan with Vodafone. They gave you a free game. I distinctly remember, and it was an online game, trying to play that game over a mobile signal and getting the message, this feature isn't supported, basically. So a game that's given to you, a multiplayer game that's given to you by the mobile provider you've signed up to, have to sign up to, for getting the 3G Vita, you then can't play that game over the internet while you're out and about on a 3G signal. Anyway, moving on from that. Yeah, there were so many decisions that were made with the Vita that I do not understand. Anyway, so that's kind of I say brief 15 minutes in, kind of a little bit of a history on the Vita. So, why did I decide to get a Vita in 2020? So, I've always liked the Vita. This is my third Vita, if I'm counting that correctly. I got one originally at release. I bought it with a credit card. Don't mind saying that. Bought a bunch of games with it. In fact, I got a pretty cracking deal with it. Because the reason being, I went for the 3G model. As I've just explained, I went for the 3G model because I wanted Wipeout 2048. And the difference in price between the Wi-Fi model and the 3G model was basically the price of Wipeout 2048. And I'd already pre-ordered Wipeout 2048. So for me, it was a no-brainer to go for the 3G model and just get Wipeout 2048 as a bundling, basically, and go from there. However, upon turning up to the game store, which is Game here in the UK, at 6 o'clock in the morning, yes, 6 o'clock in the morning, they were going to do a midnight opening. They had taken the numbers down of all the people who had signed up for the midnight opening and were going to text them if there was going to be a midnight opening or not, as the case might be. I got a text saying we're not going to do a midnight opening, but we're going to open early in the morning. So I went down there at 6 o'clock in the morning, came home from work about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, stayed up all night, and then rode down there on my motorbike at 6 o'clock in the morning, only to be told that there's been a delay on the 3G shipment. They've got Wi-Fi models in, but if you specifically want the 3G model, you have to wait. 4/5 hours later, I finally got my hands on my 3G Vita. In the interim, I was bought a coffee by Game. I was bought a McDonald's breakfast by Game. And when the shipment finally did come in, they did me a solid in which they were doing a promotion that if you were buying a game, there was a port from another system, you could buy 2 for £25. Basically, which is a really good deal at the time, because the thing about the Vita being less powerful than its console cousins or counterparts, if you will, selling a port of an existing game on the Vita, some people are on the fence about it. So Game saying that you could buy 2 for £25 on those games was a pretty good thing. However, you were limited to one 2 for £25 deal per transaction. So if you got 6 games that were 2 for £25, you'd only get 2 of those games for that £25. You'd have to pay full price for the rest. Let's just say I got all of those games for 2 for £25 because they were doing me a solid because I just waited 4 or 5 hours for my Vita. So I actually got a pretty damn good deal when it came to the Vita. So I was pretty damn impressed. I can't remember exactly where that Vita went. I do remember selling it to my dad at one point, and unfortunately it had to be sold. Obviously, I'm not going to go into reasons why. You can probably deduce why it had to be sold, but it had to be sold. I then, a while later, impulsively, much like I did with this one, decided to go and buy another Vita. I got it home, hacked it, and then proceeded to come up against a very hard wall, which I'll talk about in a minute, and sold it a week later. I got so frustrated and so bummed out by this wall that a week later, I would say cut my losses. I didn't cut any losses because there were significant financial losses to it. I just, took the loss on the chin, went back down to CX where I bought it and sold it back to them for obviously a reduced amount of money. So what was the wall I came up against? So if I actually turn this Vita off, otherwise I'm going to come up against some pretty dire consequences if I don't. Just wait for the Vita to power off as it has. If I open up the PSVita slot and take this out, this is a micro SD to SD Vita adapter. To be able to use one of these, you need to have hacked your Vita. What this basically does is it takes a standard SD memory card, as you can see there, and converts it into a Vita game card, basically. You then slot that into the game card slot of your Vita, and it basically allows you to use an SD card with your Vita, essentially. Which, if you remember me saying earlier, circumnavigates the whole having to buy a memory card for the Vita. I am still thinking actually of buying a 4 or 8 gig memory card for the Vita, just so I've got one as backup and just so I've got one as a talking point in future videos when I do talk about the Vita more in depth, because I am going to go into more in depth about the memory cards, because that is a whole thing about the Vita, is the memory cards and how they shaped the Vita in a lot of ways. So the wall I was coming up against is that there's a program you can download on the Vita, an app called Auto Plugin. What that essentially allows you to do, there's a bunch of plugins that you can use for the Vita, and they're a bit of a pain in the arse to install manually. Auto Plugin does them automatically, as the name would suggest. It wasn't doing that for me at the time, and I'd literally bought the Vita for the purpose of being able to use that functionality, and I got extremely frustrated, and so when I couldn't get it to work, I sold it back to CX. Well, if I told you the exact same thing happened again, and I came up against a hard wall. When I first bought this, the first or second weekend of this month, is currently Monday the 26th of October, just to give you a bit of context, 2020, just to get a bit of context. So when I bought this Vita a few weeks back, the first or second weekend of October, I'm not even joking when I tell you it took me 12/13 hours to finally get this fully functional the way I wanted it fully functional. I was tired, I was exhausted, I was frustrated, yeah. So basically, there's another program here called Vita Shell. Vita Shell basically allows you access to the Vita's file system. Without it, you can't do some of the things you need to do with a hacked thing. And long story short, if you manage to hack it correctly, install the things correctly, or come up in a specific slot that you've got, you know, the capacity of your memory card. So I've got a 16 gig memory card inside there. So every time I load up Vita Shell, it wouldn't show me that I had a 16 gig card in the game card slots. I just got more and more frustrated. I followed several different tutorials. I even tried to downgrade this at one point, which didn't get me anywhere. Then, one last time, just before going to bed, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try one last time. And then it worked. I cried out in joy and finally got the Vita working the way I wanted it to work. So I finally got a Vita that's functional with an SD memory card, so I haven't got to pay the astronomical prices of a memory card if I don't want to. Obviously I have said I'm probably going to go out and buy a cheap one just to have a bit of backup and of course to use it as a talking point. But I have a choice now, which to me that's what a system should give you, is choice, which maybe I'll do a video in the future about the Xbox One S/X not giving you such choice. Anyway, moving on. That's for another video. So, now I've got a Vita fully up and running, why did I want a Vita in 2020? Well, there are a few reasons. There are still some killer apps, some killer games on the Vita that I want to play. Persona 4 Golden. Yes, it has now been released for the PC, which is an actual, I think it's like an HD remaster, not remake, a remaster, an upgraded version of Persona 4, and does have some additional content in it that I do believe was cut at the time. But the game was originally meant for the Vita, so I want to play it on the Vita. So I'll be acquiring a copy of that and playing on the Vita, probably very shortly, because I'm actually off work this week, so that may be something I'll look into for a bit. The other reason is I've been a PlayStation Plus subscriber for almost the length of the service. I've taken a few breaks here and there when I've sold PS4s or PS3s over the years, but for the most part I've been a solid subscriber to PlayStation Plus, and as a result, and I claim all the games on PlayStation Plus, as a result I've got a myriad, a whole collection of PlayStation Vita games waiting for me to download, just sitting there waiting for me to download. And there are still games these days that are exclusive to the Vita. Also, I have PSP games sat on there waiting to be downloaded that I can't download to a PSP because the PS Store has been disabled on the PlayStation Portable, and I don't have a PS3. The other way is having a PS3. You can download PlayStation Portable games to the PS3 and then transfer them across to your PSP. I don't have a PS3 as it currently stands, so the only way I can download those games is on the Vita. So that's essentially the reasons why I bought the Vita. Plus, to me, the Vita does hold a kind of a special place in my heart. It was an extreme failure. Even now, it's only sold about 60 million units worldwide, which, considering that it was about 11 to 12 when it finally was considered a failure, and now it's only 16 million, it sold 3 million in the last almost a decade, 8 years or so. So it hasn't sold terribly well, but it's still thought of fondly. I still think of the Vita fondly. I still really like this system a hell of a lot. I'm just going to turn it on now just to show you my theme, which is the 20th anniversary theme, which I like quite a bit. One thing I'm going to say in this video, by the way, I think I did say it in the last video as well, is there's... I'm going to turn it down a bit. There are two variants of the Vita. There's the original Vita with the OLED screen, and then there's this Vita, the Slim, that has an LCD screen. I'm going to say this here, and say this now, as someone who has been a snob about said screen, don't think about it. The LCD screen on the Slim is still flipping fantastic. It's a beautiful screen. And the fact that people are snobby about the OLED screen versus the LCD screen, you only know a difference if you see them side by side. If you've got a PS Vita Slim, or you've got an opportunity to get a PS Vita Slim and it's a cheap, good deal for you, go for it. Don't wait out necessarily for an original Vita just because of the screen, because it's much for muchness, and when you're playing the games, you're not going to notice too much whether the screen is poorer, air quotes, than the other screen. It's not. It's still a fantastic screen. I'm just going to turn the brightness up a bit. Whoa. Whoa, dude. Whoa. That's probably too bright for the camera. I think you can actually see it now rather than being glared at by the PS Vita. So yes, that's basically the reasons why I decided to get back into the Vita. There are still games that are exclusive to the Vita, like Tearaway. Actually, Tearaway might be released on the PS4 now. But there are games that were made exclusively for the Vita that take advantage of all of its different features that it can do, such as the front-facing camera, the rear touchpad, motion control. I think it has motion controls. I actually don't know if it does. All that kind of shebang. Plus, you can still use it nowadays, such as with remote play and stuff like that. You can even sync a DualShock 4 controller to it and play games using that, and using this as like a proper up, as a screen, and use it that way. It's still a feature-rich system, and if you hack it, a whole world opens up to you. There's a homebrew scene when it comes to the PS Vita, and as I said earlier, being it was quite a big success comparatively in Japan. A lot of games were Japan only, Japanese only releases. Well, there were localized language patches that you can download onto your hacked Vita, download those Japanese games, use the language pack and play them in English. It's not perfect, the English isn't brilliant, but it's better than not understanding them at all. So there are some games that are Japanese only releases that you can now play on a hacked Vita. So having a hacked Vita does open up a world of possibilities for you. And there's something else I was going to say. Oh, yes, the final thing I was going to say is I recently got back into my PSP by playing some emulators on it. And long story short, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to buy a PS Vita, because it has a better screen, dual thumbsticks, which means more buttons, more things to assign to emulators if you want to play them on the go on a handheld. I still think the PSP is one of the best handheld emulator consoles on the market. Yes, there's been a plethora of different releases, since then, but once, because I've had a few bumps, shall we say, speed bumps, with trying to get those emulators working on the Vita. Once I do get them working, then this is going to be one fantastic emulator handheld system, and the fact that I got the SD card working, all that kind of stuff, means that finally I've got a Vita that I can really enjoy. Well guys, this has been a bit of a longer video than I expected, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm trying to think what I'm going to do for my next video. Nothing's coming to mind right now, but I'll let you know, of course, in the next video. I'm going to let you know in the next video what the next video is. Seems a bit redundant. Anyway guys, please enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Ta-ra guys.